All right, time now to get into our big interview this evening. And this coming Thursday, Treasury CS Uhuru is expected to present the budget highlights and revenue-raising measures for the national government for the financial year 2021-2022. I want to briefly run you through some of those numbers right now. That budget will look like this. Okay, overall budget, 3.66 trillion Kenya shillings. These are estimates. There might be slight changes with what you see tomorrow. Executive allocated 1.89 trillion shillings. Parliament 46.61 billion. And the judiciary, we're looking at 17.92 billion Kenya shillings. Okay, what else do we want to tell you about that budget? In terms of recurrent expenditure, 1.29 trillion Kenya shillings will go to that. Development expenditure, 666.5 billion Kenya shillings. The consolidated fund services, which actually contains pensions and debt repayment, 1.32 trillion Kenya shillings. And county governments are expected to receive 370 billion Kenya shillings. Okay, I want to run you through one or two more numbers before we get, don't get dizzy. I'm almost done. Projected revenue, Treasury expects to raise 2.04 trillion Kenya shillings, most of it from KRA. There's a deficit there of about 952 billion Kenya shillings. Where's that going to come from? We'll talk to my guests about that. You've seen the domestic debt numbers and the foreign debt numbers as well. Let's run you through one last sort of slide of financial figures. So these are some of the expected allocations. Again, this could change. COVID-19 interventions. There's a figure there of 15.4 billion Kenya shillings to deal with COVID-19 interventions, with 3.9 billion allocated for vaccines. In terms of the post-COVID-19 sort of stimulus package, 26.6 billion shillings has been allocated to that, while the Big Four agenda, about 135 billion Kenya shillings has been allocated to that. Let's now understand what all those numbers mean for you, wherever you're watching this program from. And remember, you can weigh in. Hashtag is Newsnight, SMS line 22422. My guests in studio, they've been patiently waiting. We have Kwame Owino, who's the CEO of the Institute of Economic Affairs. We have John Buddy, a member of the Budget and Appropriations Committee in the National Assembly. And Kimani Ichung'wah, former chair, Budget Committee. Dare I say, immediate former chair. He was actually a very busy man around this time last year. And Kimani Ichung'wah, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at the report of the Budget Committee, but what sort of budget would you tell Kenyans this one is?
Yes, I've had a chance, Wahiga, to have a glimpse at the estimates and, of course, the budget report that was tabled in the House this afternoon. It's overly ambitious.
Your first phrase is it's overly ambitious.
Overly ambitious.
And you're sitting next to a man who's been part of the team that's been working on that budget.
Fortunately, a man who, in many ways, we tend to agree, having come from the same background in finance, and therefore there are a number of things that you find us agreeing on. I say it's overly ambitious because, first, if you look at the revenue projections that are projected of close to 2.03 trillion shillings, an ordinary revenue of about 1.8 trillion. Vis-a-vis what is happening this year in the midst of a pandemic and a lot of businesses having gone down, a lot of people having lost jobs, it may not be very realistic, and I think this is an issue, and my brother here will agree with me, that we raised even in the last 2 or 3 years, that the realism of our revenue estimates has not been very good, and I think the same thing persists today.
You think, okay. Let me get thoughts from you, John Buddy. You spent a busy last couple of days, I imagine, working on this report that was tabled before the National Assembly. 3.7 trillion shillings in projected revenue, and there's a deficit there of about 1 trillion Kenya shillings. How are we going to fund that?
Yeah,
what are the expectations?
The deficit is exactly, the exact figure is 929 billion shillings, which is still high, close to 1 trillion, as you put it. It's projected that you would raise that by borrowing locally at 658 billion, and then foreign borrowing will be 271 billion shillings, quite high. And I think borrowing locally is going to be a challenge, and when we borrow locally, we definitely crowd out the private sector. It's not a very juicy direction to take. And borrowing externally, again, will pile up the debts. But the beauty is that the borrowing that is being projected now are basically cheaper loans. Previously, we have had to borrow very expensive loans. This time round, actually beginning from last financial year, we have been going for cheaper loan, but it's too late. You know, we say too little, too late. Hopefully, economy is going to rebound. The only thing where I want to slightly differ with Honorable Kimani Ichung'wah is about the revenue projections for this year. I think revenue projections for this year are a bit modest because we are projecting a revenue of 2 trillion or 2 trillion 4 billion. But out of that, the ordinary revenue is 1 trillion 776 billion, which, if you compare to last financial year, the projection was 1 trillion 594. The difference is about 176 or around 180 billion, 210 in total of total revenue. But if you look at the economic environment at the moment, I think the economic growth is likely to jump. It is projected that the economy may grow at 6.3% on average, 6.6% for 2021, but so the average is 6.3. Someone may look at it like a very good GDP growth. But Waiga, I want to say that we are moving from a growth rate of 0.6% because of COVID. And if you realize a growth of 6.6 or 6.3, it may look good, but it's not so good. However, the economy is recovering, and so collecting that revenue may not be a big challenge for us as a country, as opposed to previously. Remember, in 2018, 2019, we collected 1.704 trillion. The following year, it was 1.734 trillion. Last year, we had a challenge. Now, this coming year, it is possible to collect 1.776 trillion.
Okay,
so it is not too ambitious in my view.
Kimani Ichung'wah completely disagrees. Let me, Kimani, I'll give you a chance to say why you disagree, but let me bring in Kwame. Kwame, Kenyans are watching this show from across the country and they are wondering, don't talk too much about the numbers. Tell me how this budget will affect me. Either give me some breathing space or the pinch will be even tighter. How would you explain that budget to them? What does it mean for the ordinary Kenyan if the budget, passes as has been envisioned?
Okay. I think if the budget passes, to just summarize the numbers again, yes, maybe Kenyans don't want to hear the numbers, but government would be spending 10 billion shillings a day. I mean, yes, 10 billion shillings a day for the entire 360 days of the next financial year. Of that amount, close to 50% is paying debt.
So 10 billion shillings a day, 50% is paying debt?
50% or so is just paying public debt. So what that means, close to 40%, I mean, I have to be fair, about 40% is paying public debt. And to balance its numbers, it's also going to have to borrow an additional 2 billion per day to keep everything in balance. So that's where we are. At the same time, to balance these numbers, of course, I agree that this year's projections for taxes seem to be a little bit more modest, but it makes big assumptions. One of those assumptions is that growth has bounced back. I am concerned because in another 6 or 8 weeks, we are going back to another lockdown by virtue of the fact that, look, in the same numbers, I'd have been more confident if so for instance, the Ministry of Health, the biggest challenge, our view at the Institute of Economic Affairs is the biggest economic policy challenge is also the health challenge. If we can't get back Kenyans to work every day or work safely, then it means every 12 weeks or so the president is going to announce lockdowns. How do you solve that? It's clear now what the solution is. It's vaccination. Instead, what has happened is that the Ministry of Health at the national level has received an additional 2 billion shillings, just an additional 2 billion shillings, while government claims that the additional 600 billion that is being invested is for the purposes of COVID recovery. At the same time, the amount of money that has been dedicated to vaccination, which is both the health and the economic policy solution, is 3.9 billion, which can't even get another 1% of the country. So I don't know, what we have is using the name of COVID to expand spending so that it can be spent in the favorite projects that perhaps people in the treasury or parliamentarians reserve. Let me say finally, I think we owe Kenyans the truth, and the truth is this. Both members of parliament, and they tend to be sensible ones, and they understand the numbers.
And I have a question for you about that, but I was going to... But anyway, you
Both
go ahead.
members of parliament have lamented here that they've always thought that the budget is ambitious, but they do nothing. I mean, but they are not able to. What are you telling us? That you haven't read the Constitution? This budget the country's constitutional order means that the guys who make the budget are you. Treasury simply gives you proposals which you can accept or not. So if you've accepted it, please own your mistakes. Don't try to backpass. We live in a country where there's too much backpassing. Please own your mistakes. The deficits that we've seen and the choices that have been made for this year reflect what you've agreed to. That's it. Please accept your mistakes.
Because Kwame, my question to you was going to be, I'm seeing a lot of tweets here saying the president needs to do X, Y, Z.
Yes.
But no reference to parliament.
Well, I mean, look, Kenyans, the days when the president determined what was spent are gone, except the parliament refused to accept the new order. Article 201 of the Constitution states principles. The power of approving budgets is in the House. That's why we don't have it until all these gentlemen and the ladies in Parliament agree. The President simply signs a budget to make it law after Parliament has made that decision.
Okay.
So if anything in the budget looks out of kilt or it's not what we as citizens require, then the people to direct a tough conversation with are these two gentlemen and their committee members.
I want to know how ready they are to have that conversation. Kimani Ichung'wah, can the residents of your constituency bear another lockdown in another 10 to 12 weeks? This man crunches the numbers and he says it's coming.
Well, it's the reality of life today, and that's why I told you, for me, as much as my two colleagues are saying the revenue estimates seem a little bit better than they were previously. And to an extent, you could say it is true. However, look at it, and Buddy gave you the figure of 1.574 trillion as the projected revenue estimates for this current financial year that ends in another 3 weeks. But the actual revenue collections on ordinary revenue are way below the 1.594. And therefore, if you want to have proper projections, project from the actual revenue collections today, and you will see it will not be possible to achieve the 1.776, almost 1.8 trillion in ordinary revenue, unless we get to the finance bill and overtax Kenyans, or in a way be able to expand the tax base. That tax base is what I'm telling you is shrinking by the day. A lot of people have lost jobs, close to 2 million Kenyans who are informal employment, who are paying pay as you earn have lost. Very many businesses have collapsed. Look at the entire hotel industry, the entire travel and hospitality industry is down on its knees. And therefore, the triple effects of other businesses that ride on some of the businesses that are closed down. Even the curfew at 10 p.m. Wahiga. Bars, restaurants, taxi business, and all other businesses that are usually very resilient to tough economic times are today shut down. If what Kome projects is true, or if it comes true that maybe, and their projection, the health experts are telling us maybe towards the end of July or mid-July we will be staring at another lockdown. And I've seen it happening in, I think in Uganda, Kisumu today, Kisumu being one of our tourist destinations. You never know what happens. With that in mind, Wahiga, and John Buddy will tell you in the committee that he sits in, they are telling us that, and the National Treasury is telling us that we are projecting GDP growth of about 6.3% on average and 6.1% in the medium term. And that is largely anchored on one, a very stable macroeconomic environment, two, on a stable political environment. And remember, we are heading into an election and the possibility of a referendum. I don't know if John Buddy has provided funds for that in this year's estimates. And of course, plus preparations for IEBC preparations for mass voter registration and all the other things that will come into play with an election. And of course, also assuming that there will be increased domestic consumption or local consumption. And of course, also increased external demand of our goods. Ask yourself, increased primary consumption, domestic consumption, Wahiga, will come from Kenyans having money in their pockets. Where is that money in Kenyans' pockets? Therefore, when I tell you that the revenue estimates, even as they are, to me, are not very realistic, I am just basing it on those very simple facts that we are confronted with uncertainty of a political environment that is uncertain. We are not even certain if we'll be confronted with a referendum and an election next year. Mm-hmm. We don't know what will come with the referendum. And therefore, investors who are looking at investing in this country are looking at those issues. The increase in domestic consumption, Wahiga, it means you and me and all other people, millions that have lost jobs, have no disposable income to consume.
Okay. You've asked Buddy 2 questions, which I'm hoping you can give him a chance to respond to. I'm
sure he's noting somewhere. Buddy is an intelligent guy.
Briefly, please.
But I was saying, with that in mind, and in fact, it's some of the issues that the Budget and Appropriations Committee has raised, that with these uncertainties, of course, also compounded by the uncertainty also in the global economy. You don't know whether the global economy will open up for there now to be demand for our goods, our tea, our coffee going out. The uncertainty in exchange rate fluctuations. The increase in our public debt. Mbadi has told you, close to 929 billion is what is projected as a fiscal deficit. Projected again. In reality, we will end up with a deficit that is way above 1 trillion shillings.
We actually will be talking...
That means more borrowing.
Yes.
It means the 600 billion that you are going to borrow from the domestic market, it is the government competing against you as an investor, me as a trader, in the banks. And therefore, that means we will have no access to capital.
And
growth.
yet you're talking here like an ordinary Kenyan, and yet you're a member of
Let me finish by just answering Kwame.
I wanted you to finish.
And tell Kwame, it is indeed true, that is what the Constitution says. But the Constitution also says that the President appoints judges. As recommended by JSC, he has not done it. He has contravened the Constitution. The budget is supposed to be approved by Parliament. And indeed, Parliament approves that budget. But I'll tell you, it is an executive tool. It is an executive tool to implement the programs and the policies as they want to implement from the executive. Parliament, of course, if Parliament was fully independent,
yes,
then that approval process then would come. But you know the politics that will come into play.
Okay.
I will have my say, but the majority will have their way.
Hang on there, and we'll come back and talk a bit more about that. John Buddy, a lot has been said. I don't know where you want to begin. Parliament's independence. No. This budget, how much of it is Parliament's independent thinking, and how much of it is executive pressure?
First of all, let me... there's something that I want to address regarding what Kimani Ichung'wah talked about. I agree entirely that if there is any interruption or disruption in the political environment, the health, we know the health crisis that we have and possible lapse to the 4th wave, etc., of the pandemic, definitely to interfere with the projections that we have. I also wanted to answer Kimani that actually up to April, Kenya, we did collect 1 trillion 420 billion, which was a shortfall of the projected revenue by just 45 billion. So we didn't do so badly as we expected. So there is a possibility, and you see the global economy is likely to grow at 6%, down up from negative 3.3% in the last financial year. Mm-hmm. That is likely to impact positively even on the Kenyan economy. Remember, our exports, interestingly, we exported more than the import, so we had a more positive kind of balance in that line.
But trade.
But let me address the issue that you have put before us, and which, of course, Kwame spoke to. The truth is that Parliament is not entirely in control of the budget as it should. And by the way, depending on which political divide, on which side of the political divide you stand at a particular time, you tend to see it or not to see it. I remember from 2013 up to the time that my friend technically left the government, I consistently sounded an alarm bell that we are borrowing money to pay recurrent expenditure. And you will confirm that there is no single budget from 2013 where I did not sound an alarm that we are actually borrowing to pay recurrent expenditure. We are borrowing for corruption, etc., etc. That time, I will tell you, the executive controlled Parliament. Right now, again, still, there are challenges, because again, the executive talks about budget as theirs. And by the way, they are the ones who have a policy to implement. It's a executive's policy. So what have we done in this budget? What we have done in this budget is we have made some changes. Of course, I've seen you put up there that Parliament has a budget of 46 billion. No, we have only approved 37 billion. You've only approved 37 billion. As it was last year. In fact, there is just a modest increase from 37.3 to 37.8 billion. So that is one example. We have, fortunately for this year, and this Honorable Kimani Chungwa will agree with me, that for this year, the budget estimates or the budget ceilings as they were in BPS have been respected. We have never had such. Only 14 billion. Yes. Previously, the difference between budget policy statement and the actual budget estimates was as clear as day and night. For the first time, at least, we have managed to enforce that discipline in the budget estimates. And I think that is a positive step. On the issue of borrowing, unfortunately, this is the time we are not supposed to borrow more, and it is the time we need to borrow more. Because this is the time that our economy is in total mess, partly because of COVID and partly because of past mistakes that we have made, largely from 2013 to date. And this is the time that we don't have that space, the fiscal space, to make borrowings. We already have budgets, the total debt level is at 8.4 trillion.
We're not even talking 7.6. So
and by the way, we have only 600 billion left.
Before we hit the 9 trillion ceiling.
And our projected borrowing is 929 billion. So what does that tell you? We have no choice, if we have to approve this budget as it is, but to increase the debt ceiling. That is the plain truth. And this is where sometimes members of parliament, and Kwame, you are right to fault us. I find members of parliament very interesting. We passed the budget policy statement where we have the budget, the debt ceiling, the debt level for 2021-2022. Tomorrow or the day after, we will pass the estimates with 929 billion shillings.
Deficit.
Yet, deficit, 929 debt deficit. Then you will find members making noise, shouting in parliament to block the debt increase of the debt ceiling.
And on social media.
How can you block increasing of the debt, increase on debt ceiling when you have already approved and allowed the government to borrow?
We do need to take a break, but before that, I want to get a thought from Kwame and read the tweets. We'll put some up just now. Kwame, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Yeah. I'm not saying anyone is insane. I'm saying the act of doing the same thing. And it sounds like that's where we are. That's true. How do we stop this?
Well, I think it's true. Doing the same thing every now and again. Look, let me just tell members of parliament, we are at least 2 budgets away from a crash. And if it crashes, it will not matter which administration is in charge.
Kimani says 1 budget away.
Okay, fine.
1 budget away.
Okay, I was being generous, but let me say, I actually think
1 budget away.
That's true. We can't shuffle these numbers. And obviously, I think that the executive itself is a victim of its own habits. The only guys who can stop them right now are these guys. Now, when I hear them lament that, well, the president doesn't obey law and everything, I disagree. I disagree. Let me tell you why I disagree. We understand the question about the budgets. The judiciary. It's sad, but every time the president calls them, regardless of which political divide they are in, they go. So when you go and see the president and you tell him, look, we have a common interest in not crashing this. Guys, when a crash takes place after death has happened, you'll have even fewer options to tell us who's obeying law and who's not. And Kenyans will be so angry that some of you guys will be beaten up in your constituencies. Please don't let us get there. I think that even as Mbadi said that, well, he was trying to throw shade at his colleague by saying that, look, when I was sitting in the opposition, I used to ask you and you guys never. But there's no single time you people voted against it by simply putting on the record that, fine, you guys go ahead, but the deficit that we have that has been continuous concerns us. You don't. You only say that out here in studios, right? But when you're in the ground where you're supposed to do something else, you either are silent or you let it pass. You need to record that this has happened without our consent. That way you show we as Kenyans and citizens that you actually care. You don't have much space before this collapses. And if it happens, unfortunately, you're the ones parliamentarians can reach. Nobody knows about the cabinet secretaries and secretaries in the whatever. You're the guys who need to go and campaign next year. People are going to cane you. Guys, don't. I'm sure. I tell you this. I mean, the disgust that we see.
But will you be the first, Kwame?
No, I will not. Violence is a bad thing. The reason I say this is
someone just slapped Macron today.
Somebody
precisely. Someone pushed his hand against a president in France today, and Kenyans were saying, "Next is our MPs." They didn't say president. So if you guys think you can hide behind the president by saying he's disobeying law, you're the guys are gonna kill. It's bad. Don't get it there.
Before you get canned,
I think caning and being slapped, it happens to us every day. Maybe the only person it is there to happen to is the president. Hopefully, maybe some Kenyan will get encouragement from what.
I hope you're not encouraging illegal.
I'm not encouraging anybody, but
violence
maybe
is not tolerated on this show. Please carry on with your point.
Maybe it could happen. I'm only saying, but I just want to agree with what John Buddy was saying, that it is indeed true that when he was in the opposition, he spoke about us overborrowing, us spending just like we are doing today. The debt levels today, about the debt refinancing, CFS, the figures you're talking about, he was talking about 40%, is actually about 45% of the entire budget, the CFS. That's the Consolidated Fund Services. About 65% of our ordinary revenue. And therefore, Mbadi mentioned things he spoke about between 2013 and 2017. Those things still persist today. Is John Mbadi speaking about them today? I think that's the question Kwame is asking. And when he spoke about them then, what happened? Those of us that were in the majority in government, in parliament, defended government as it were. Like John Buddy today is defending government as it is today. John Buddy had his say, and I said, I have my say today to point out that indeed what we are doing is unrealistic in terms of revenue estimates. What we are doing, we are further strangulating Kenyans. Kenyans will be confronted. You wait until the finance bill comes, Wahiga. You will see the strangulation that will come with the finance bill. Remember, we are now in the IMF regime that comes with very stringent tax measures that will be coming in the course of this month. Kenyans will come to the realization of how stringent things will be in terms of tax administrative reforms. You will see Kenyans being laid off from jobs, hopefully, unless we decide to be politically expedient and fight it out with the IMF. But the expanded credit facility that we are having with the IMF doesn't come free of charge. It's not a free bus ride. It will come with very stringent conditions that will further strangulate Kenyans. And in view of that, I am telling you, this budget, as it is today, we may speak about it here, as Kwame says, on social media, on mainstream media like this, but at the end of the day, unless we are able to stop the executive in parliament, but the question is, can we?
John Buddy,
but
at any point in the budget-making process as the committee, did you talk about a referendum and money for it? Do you talk about IBC in 2020? Is there anything in this budget that looks into that?
No, first of all, let me just answer your question. There is no provision for referendum in the budget because it is still a matter that is in court and has to be settled in court before. You can't budget for something that is uncertain. So I think I've answered that question.
That as a further risk to the budget process.
But,
okay, noted.
But can I just now address, you know, Kimani is saying that I think you're implying that since handshake I haven't been saying what I used to say. I think you are wrong. Even if you go and get my debate on the last budget, it is still the same.
I was your chair. And I agree with you. He's been very consistent. But the point I was trying to make, sorry to cut you short, I was trying to make the point that we will speak, but it never goes beyond
but
speaking.
remember,
unless there is goodwill from the executive, unless there is willingness from the highest office.
You're taking my
You're taking his time. Go ahead.
But remember, for the first time, Kimani, last year we rejected the budget and it went back to the Treasury to be redrawn because we felt that it was not sensitive to It was not responsive to COVID. And actually, after the budget was taken back to the Treasury, it was adjusted. And you saw a number of provisions in the budget that was actually trying to address, not satisfactorily though, but trying to address the issues of COVID-19. Now, this financial year, why it may be difficult now to, at this point in time, to stop the budget estimates is because budget estimates are is exactly mirroring what we passed in the BPS. And so, in my view, I think for the first time, we have managed to condition the Treasury to follow what we passed as a policy framework. Because once you pass a policy framework, and that is why it comes in February, so that we agree in a nutshell and in a global perspective, where do we want money to go and where are we getting the money from? And that is exactly what the Treasury has done this time. So what justification would we have, apart from a few adjustments like what has come from various departmental committees, which is going to affect about 20 billion of reallocations here and there, and another, say, 26 billion of extra funding which the committees have sought, for which we are yet to approve, because really, where do you get that money from? I think we have basically had a budget that follows the budget policy statement.
Which you are pleased with.
Now, Kwame is asking Kenyans to slap us. I don't think Kenyans need to slap us.
I just say that Kenyans are very disgusted, and when they saw that sad incident of somebody attacking the president of France, they actually tagged that and said this should happen to Kenyan MPs.
Could he be referencing the Kenyans' actions a month or two ago when they stormed IMF pages, for example?
Sometimes Kenyan MPs are condemned. We are public figures and public state officers, and we are paid by Kenyan taxes, and therefore we need to be held accountable. But you see, like I've been reading in the papers and the media how Parliament has colluded with Treasury to increase Parliament's budget so that we can keep a blind eye on that is not true.
Not true at all.
Actually, the Budget Committee refused to accept proposal from Parliamentary Service Commission. Parliamentary Service Commission wanted us to give them 46 billion, which you have indicated here as the money given to them. But Budget Committee said no.
I said estimates.
So the fact that Parliamentary Service Commission has requested for more money does not mean that members of Parliament have approved that money.
Gentlemen,
so I just wanted to be clear.
I need to take that break. Kimani, 30 seconds. Can you keep it short?
30 seconds. I wanted to remind John Buddy and correct you. Indeed,
because you're eating Kwame's airtime as well.
It's not estimates. It's actually what was requested by the Parliamentary Service Commission.
Okay.
Then what was an estimate is the figure John Buddy gave, an increment of probably just about 300 million. 300 million. Yeah, for Parliament. But I wanted to remind John Buddy that indeed we have been slapped. And I am a victim, I will tell you. John Buddy has just told you last year, for the first time, when I was chair of the Budget and Appropriations Committee, they brought estimates in April, we set them back. I chaired the meeting, and I said, this budget is not reflective of the realities today. That was in last year's budget. We sent it back to them. He came back with a 53.7 billion economic stimulus package for COVID. This year, trust me, Wahiga, I would have done the same. I would have told them again, this budget is not reflective of the realities that persist today. I would have sent it back. When I did that last year, I was slapped. I was thrown out of the committee. Before that, John Buddy, I'll remind you, the year before, let me just remind John Buddy. Let me remind John Buddy. The year before,
it's not about the budget, it's about his political leading.
Buddy will remember.
He was a very good chair of the Budget Committee.
He agreed on a good chair, very forthright, and that's why we agree on many things. The year before, 1920, you remember, they came with a very high budget on the UHC program. I think about 28 billion shillings. Again, we declined.
Yes.
John Buddy was in the forefront of it. He knows what happened one evening between me and him. And you know,
what happened?
No things we will discuss on air, but he knows. Therefore, when he talks about being slapped, he knows we have been slapped.